Welcome to another hot episode of Reddit Stories. Today we're diving into a whirlwind of Reddit anecdotes that combine seduction, secrets, and a touch of madness. Get ready for a journey from a nightclub full of intriguing characters to a hospital where nighttime madness is the order of the day. And, if that wasn't enough, we'll meet a mysterious neighbor who could have stepped out of a thriller novel. What happens when curiosity turns into desire? Let's find out together. Hold on tight, because these stories are about to light the spark. Let's get started.
The Secret Diary of a Call Girl. Intimate Confessions from a Nightclub. Okay, Reddit. It's time for a weird and slightly spicy confession. This is a story I haven't told anyone, but I think it's time. If you ever wondered what those nights of glamour, laughter, and secrets at nightclubs are really like, here's my little truth. For those curious, I'm what some call an escort girl. And while some may think it's all glitz and luxury, sometimes the nights can be an explosive mix of adrenaline and chaos. This story happened a few months ago on one of those nights that seems straight out of a movie. My client for the night was a businessman who insisted that the night be epic. When I arrived at the club, he had already reserved an entire VIP area, surrounded by friends who looked like they were straight out of a mobster movie. He greeted me as if I was the star of the night, and at that moment, I could only think that it would be an interesting night. After a few glasses of champagne, the party started to heat up. The VIP area was packed, and everyone seemed interested in seeing who could take the night to the next level. My client asked me to dance for them, and, with the music blasting, I started moving to the beat, feeling like the queen of the place. Every step and every turn was designed to keep everyone on the edge of their seats. But then came the real surprise. Amidst the music and the light show, one of my client's friends offered me a VIP balcony of sorts. They say the view from above was incredible, and with the mood of the night, I didn't hesitate. There, with everyone watching us from below, he pulled out a small bottle of champagne and made me a private toast. It was an intimate moment, but one of those that makes you feel watched and desired. While we were toasting, he began to kiss me softly on the neck, which, in another context, would have been strange. But here, with everyone around, it felt like we were in our own little private bubble. The people below couldn't take their eyes off each other, and some even started to applaud. I felt like I was starring in my own movie. To add to the drama, my client, yes, the businessman, went up to the balcony too, and there we were, the three of us, sharing laughter, champagne, and that electrifying moment when the looks said it all. In the end, the whole club seemed to be enjoying the show without knowing who we really were. I felt like a movie star that everyone was looking at with curiosity, without knowing my real story. The businessman and his friend finally helped me down, and, between laughs and mischievous glances, the night ended in a luxury hotel. But of course, nothing was going to be that simple. My two companions and I arrived at the lobby and, as we crossed the entrance, a group of men dressed in black suits approached us. At first, I thought they were hotel security, but no. It turns out they were part of my client's entourage. I had never seen him, but, apparently, he doesn't travel anywhere without them, for security reasons. That's when I knew that the night was just beginning. We went up to the suite, which was no ordinary room. It was a real penthouse. The city lights could be seen through huge windows, and in the living room there was a bubbling jacuzzi in one corner, waiting to be used. One of my client's friends pulls out a bottle of very expensive liquor and starts handing out drinks. My client, amused and relaxed, takes me by the hand and leads me to one of the sofas. Between laughs and intense glances, he asks me if I'm ready for the surprise of the night. Intrigued, I say yes, and at that moment his friend opens a door at the back of the suite and makes a gesture, as if inviting someone to enter. To my surprise, another woman enters the room, an incredibly beautiful woman with an imposing presence. She gives me a knowing look and approaches my client, who explains that she is a special friend who is also part of the celebration. The tension in the room instantly rises, and I can't help but feel anticipation. A few minutes pass, and between laughs and drinks, she approaches me. Her gaze is a mix of interest and challenge. We stand there, looking at each other, as if we were measuring who would take the initiative. Finally, she extends a hand and invites me to a special toast. We raise our glasses and, suddenly, without further ado, everyone in the room finds ourselves sharing a moment of pure adrenaline and complicity, as if we were in a game that only we understood. The most unexpected thing comes when, after a while, I notice that my client has disappeared. I ask about him, but his friends smile and say that he is most likely attending to business matters. In disbelief, I wonder if he would really put aside his own party to leave, but it is not long before we receive a note slipped under the door. One of the guys picks it up and hands it to me with a smile. The note reads, "The real surprise awaits you downstairs in the lobby. I hope you like the challenge." Intrigued, but without hesitation, I take the elevator down to the lobby. As I exit, I meet a chauffeur who tells me that I have a limo ready to take me to the next location. At that moment, I realize that this night will be one that will remain forever in my memory. We arrive at an old, elegant building where I am greeted by a person who hands me a black envelope. Inside, there is a card with a message that says, "Never underestimate the power of a first impression. Thank you for an unforgettable night." And there I find myself, in the silence of a transformed night, with a memory that, even in its mystery, leaves me with a feeling of intrigue and satisfaction. Update. I didn't expect so much response in the original post, but I think it's only fair to tell you how this chapter of my life ended, especially for all of you who were left intrigued by the mysterious note. After that night, and the strange message I received, I couldn't stop thinking about my client and the details of the evening. I admit that, although I have had very intense nights, this one had something unique. The next morning, still with the black envelope in my hand, I wondered if I would receive any news, or if that message had been his final farewell. Until, a couple of days later, I received a call. When I answered, I recognized his voice immediately. Without further ado, he invited me to dinner, this time in a much more discreet place. "It's not a party, it's just to talk," he said, with a calm and mysterious voice. Out of curiosity or simple attraction, I accepted. We met in an elegant and quiet restaurant, very different from the club. When I arrived, he was waiting for me with a bottle of wine and an intense, almost complicit look. During dinner, he shared some things about his life that I would never have imagined. He told me how, despite his life full of luxuries and eccentricities, he felt lonely in many ways. He confessed that our evening was a kind of escape for him, a chance to live something without ties. Then came the real revelation. That game, the note, and the mystery of the limousine were his way of testing me. I wanted to see how someone like me would react in an out-of-the-ordinary situation, whether I would be intimidated or whether I would keep my composure to the end. His explanation left me frozen. I didn't expect our night to be some sort of personal social experiment. I stared at him and asked if he had any other test in mind. He smiled at me and said that for someone so brave, there were always more surprises. That encounter closed the chapter in the most intriguing way possible. I have since moved on, but that night remains one of those stories I keep as a special secret, a reminder that sometimes mystery and risk are the best rewards.
So, basically, this girl went from being a call girl to the protagonist of her own version of The Squid Game, Millionaire Edition with an existentialist philosopher complex. And here I am, hoping that my dinner has extra cheese without it being a personality test. Some are just looking for therapy, but others apparently put on shows in penthouses. Bravo, champion! Cheers to the life of luxury and maximum weirdness. Now on to the second story, which is full of what the fuck moments. Let's get started.
Confessions from the Night Shift. Hospital stories you'll never forget. Imagine, it's 3 a.m., that magical hour when the hospital becomes a world apart, silent, and surreal. I was checking the equipment, half on autopilot, when I had to enter the room of one of our patients. Intubated, connected to a ventilator, and, well, with a fully functioning Foley catheter. And there, in the dim light of the room, I ran into his girlfriend, who had decided that a hospital ward was the perfect setting to get creative and stage it, as if it were a deleted scene from a movie of very dubious taste. I swear that at that moment my brain didn't even process real words. It was more like an, ooh, wadia foo suso, and I vanished from there without looking back. The best part of all? The girl didn't even bother to pretend she was doing something else. That's dedication. Sure, I went straight to the charge nurse, who, after recovering from the initial shock, called security. A couple of questions later, the girlfriend came clean. She didn't flinch. Seriously, not one bit embarrassed. She was taken out of the hospital, and the patient, who had been admitted for an overdose, was extubated and released to the streets within a few days. Because everyone here gets their dose of drama. But this is just the appetizer. Less than a year later, another night shift case for the record books. This time, a guy comes in for an overdose of a fentanyl patch that, we were told, he had decided to snort after setting it on fire. During the bronchoscopy, we found a piece of the patch turned to ash, still bearing the F for fentanyl. Let's just say this guy knew what he was inhaling. Unfortunately, the patient had been deprived of oxygen for too long, and we were already in the awkward discussion about withdrawing life support. And the doctor, an older guy with decades of experience and a cool head for any scene, called the entire team into the room to make a decision. There we were, about 10 of us around the bed, when the patient's wife blurted out the following without being asked. I want to donate his organs, but I want to keep his penis, because his is perfect. The entire room fell into absolute silence, except for the doctor, who, with the calm of a Buddhist monk, explained that this was not something we could do. He added that, however, we would gladly investigate organ donation. But instead of calming down, the patient's wife launched into a full-throated monologue to convince us. You just don't understand. The world needs that perfection. She looked at us one by one, as if she were about to cry or seduce us. Who knows? And there we were, caught in some kind of bizarre soap opera in the middle of the hospital ward. The scene was surreal. Somehow, this woman was convinced that it was our responsibility to protect and preserve that part of him. And before anyone could stop her, she began to relate in a low voice, almost like a secret between friends, every detail of why, according to her, that attribute was worthy of an altar. She told us how it was the only consolation in their long nights together, and how, without it, her life would be meaningless. Most of us exchanged glances, trying not to burst out laughing or go into shock. The doctor, visibly uncomfortable but trying to remain professional, intervened. I understand your emotional attachment, but believe me, this is not a medical option. But she wouldn't back down. You just don't understand. You doctors always think about science, but what about love? She said with big, bright eyes, as if she were defending her last vestige of humanity. And here comes the unexpected twist. Suddenly, one of the younger interns who had been half asleep in the back raises his hand and asks, well, what if we mold it? I mean, as a souvenir print. Everyone turned their heads, surprised and on the verge of laughter, as the doctor glared at the boy. We're here to discuss serious medical issues, the doctor growled, but not without a small smile escaping. The wife, however, was intrigued by the idea of the mold. Is that possible? She asked, genuinely interested, as if the boy had just solved her life. The insistence on the subject led the doctor to call a psychologist, who eventually arrived and took the wife away for evaluation and emotional containment. We sat in silence for a while, all of us looking like we had just survived a tornado. As soon as the door closed, someone finally broke the silence. Well, I think I've got my story for next happy hour. That night shift will definitely never be forgotten.
So now Eternal Love includes memorial casts? Just when you think you've seen it all at the hospital, along comes the lady wanting to make her own DIY erotic museum, and the intern suggesting ideas as if we were on an episode of Shark Tank. For romantics who want to remember, but with an anatomically detailed twist. Now that's love that can last a lifetime, my friends. What a gem. Our next story is wonderful, full of mystery, suspense, and lots of lust. Let's get started.
My first encounter with the mysterious neighbor on the 9th floor. It all started a couple of months ago, on a night when my insomnia kept me awake longer than usual. I live in a building where, apparently, nothing interesting ever happens. But that night, as I looked out the window trying to guess the stories of the people in their apartments, I saw something that caught my attention. The light on the 9th floor, which was always off, was now bright, and shadows were moving inside. Oh, the mysterious neighbor is finally home, I thought, as if I already knew him. I didn't know anything about him, but some of the neighbors said he was a reserved, attractive, and not very talkative guy. He was the kind of guy who went unnoticed, but once you looked into his eyes, well, let's just say that those who had didn't seem to have forgotten him. That night, while sleep didn't come, I decided to take charge. I climbed to the 9th floor in silence, without a reasonable excuse, driven only by a nagging curiosity. When I reached his door, the light was on and soft music was playing on the other side. It took me a moment to gather the courage, but I finally knocked. The door opened, and there he was, a tall man with a few days' worth of beard and a pair of dark eyes that seemed to study my every move. He looked at me, raising an eyebrow, and motioned me in. Without saying anything, I crossed the threshold and felt caught up in the mystery that emanated from him. Not even 2 seconds passed before he began speaking in a low, almost hoarse voice. "I don't usually have visitors, much less at this hour," he said with a barely perceptible smile. I responded with an innocent flirtation, and he smiled, as if he saw through any pose. We stood for a few more seconds, just looking at each other. I don't know exactly how it happened, but the next thing I remember is his hands taking mine, unhurriedly, leading me to his living room. The lights were dim, and the atmosphere was charged with that electricity you can't describe until you feel it. The silence between us was complicit, as if he knew neither of us were there by chance. "I was told you were the most reserved guy in the whole building," I said, wanting to break the ice. He laughed, that soft laugh that seems more like a whisper, and moved a little closer. "And you're intrigued enough to come up here?" he replied, his thumb gently caressing the back of my hand. I nodded, letting the moment speak for me. I can say that time stood still that night, that every glance and every touch seemed to be rehearsed on some other plane. I don't know how it happened, but his breath brushed my neck and I closed my eyes, losing myself in every detail. We didn't need to talk. In the heat of that moment, what was a mystery became desire. I don't know if it was the way his hands, firm but careful, slowly ran over me, or the intensity of his gaze, as if he wanted to unravel every corner of my skin. The electricity I felt when his breath touched me made me shudder. His mouth traced a soft, slow path, leaving a trail of heat that lit up every fiber of my body. We moved as if the rhythm was already set, slow and deep, and each breath felt like a promise between whispers. That moment seemed to last forever, until something unexpected changed everything. Between kisses, my gaze fell on a strange scar on his left shoulder, a small but defined mark, almost hidden. Before I could ask him, his fingers intertwined mine, as if he had noticed my interest. "Some things are better left unexplained," he murmured, and although he left me with 1,000 questions, I couldn't help but immerse myself again in the intensity of his caresses. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, because time no longer existed, until we lay exhausted, tangled under the sheets. While he slept, my gaze wandered around his room, noticing details I hadn't noticed before. On his nightstand, there was an old-looking ring and a sealed envelope with no return address. There was something magnetic in his stillness, in the way the shadows of the room fell on him. I decided to get up silently, driven by that insatiable curiosity, and I approached the envelope. It was a thick envelope, and inside was just a corner of paper with handwritten letters. I hesitated, but when I pulled the flap open a little, I heard his voice, low and deep. "That's not for you." I turned around, nervous, expecting him to be upset. But no, he was looking at me with a half-smile, as if he was amused to see me caught up in his game. I approached him again and asked him what was in the envelope. With an intense look, he simply whispered, "If you want to know me, you'll have to come back." The mystery didn't fade, but grew even thicker, entangling me deeper into his world. I couldn't stop thinking about him. For days, I found myself looking for excuses to pass by his door, hoping to see that light on again, but the apartment remained silent and dim. Finally, after almost a week of playing amateur detective, I decided to muster up the courage and return to the 9th floor. This time, the door was ajar. I took it as a sign and peeked in, feeling that mix of adrenaline and curiosity that had drawn me to him from the beginning. The light in his living room was on, but the space seemed different. Everything was spotless and cold, as if no one had lived there in weeks. There were no traces of our nights together, nor of the envelope I had seen on his nightstand, nor even of the ring I had noticed. The room was empty, and a shiver ran down my spine. I decided to approach the window, where I had seen his silhouette for the first time. My heart was racing when I noticed a small package on the windowsill, wrapped in dark paper and with no name on it. I opened it with trembling hands, and inside I found the ring, the same one I had seen the first night, and a short note. Some stories are only true as long as they last. See you at the next mystery. I haven't seen him since. His apartment was left empty, and not even the building management could tell me anything about him. Sometimes, as I pass by the door, I feel like he might be watching, smiling from some hidden corner, waiting for the perfect moment to reappear. And so, he left me with only one certainty. Some mysteries are not solved. They are only lived.
So this ninth floor neighbor is the equivalent of Netflix and chill with a CSI twist. Where are my belongings? Give me a ring and disappear like we're in a 90s romance movie. The girl who just wanted some fun meets the Houdini of apartments. Come on, who's missing a ring? A note of, see you at the next mystery? Sounds more like a tagline from a detective series than a date. Wait, maybe the next episode will be the search for a ghost's ex-boyfriend. Just in case, I'd keep looking for the lights on the 10th floor. There might be a new mystery waiting. What a ride! This concludes another episode full of unexpected twists and jaw-dropping moments. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe now so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Don't forget to give it a like and leave a comment telling us which story left you most intrigued. See you next time, where we'll unearth more secrets and spicy tales that you won't want to miss. Until then.